Reiterating, both the FBI and the police knew that Christina Lewinsky would have to go incognito to avoid further attacks. Under advice from both agencies and her shaken husband, Christina assumed the identity of Susan Johnson, being as common stateside as the name Fatima Ahmed would be in the Middle East. All agreed that it would allow her some degree of anonymity required to forestall the Muslim terrorists a little longer time before they reacquired their gun sights on her again. What Susan Johnson and her husband did not know was that Muslim terrorists, in like manner of the Mafia, are single-mindedly tenacious in tracking down whistleblowers. There was no place on earth that would grant them respite. With their omnipresence in Western cities, large and small, the only sure sanctuary was the grave. Only God can protect you from them. They are rapidly growing and multiplying in the West through polygamy, unrestrained birth rates and conversions from within and without, through mass immigrations, illegal aliens, refugees, resettlements, and illegal entry from all points to the Western world. Every Muslim wants to escape from his country because his country is hell on earth. The paradox is that every Muslim hates the Western way of life, but loves Western lands. They want to come to the West because of the benefits made available to them there. Their women love to live in the West because they will be protected from the oppression and abuses of their male-dominated societies. Even so, none of them can accept the Western culture. When they come to the West, they see themselves as the most moral and holy people, with everybody else being immoral and unclean. Sometimes, their hatred of Western way of life might drive them back to the Muslim lands. Recently, 3 Muslim sisters, Khadija Dawood, 29 years old, Zohra Dawood 32, and Sigra Dawood 34, whose family was originally from Pakistan but they born and raised up in UK, shocked the British society by travelling to Syria to join ISIS. 3 British sisters from Bradford left their husbands and travelled to Syria, taking with them their 9 children, to live under ISIS. The Guardian, Sunday, June 21, 2015. Their 3 husbands were interviewed and appealed in tears for their wives to return and bring their children to Britain. While they were in Bradford, the 3 sisters were known for their devoutness in Islam while in Britain, holding Quran classes, and spreading Islamic material on the Internet. Robert Spencer, Jihad Watch, June 16, 2015. Below are a few quotes from an article written by a Muslim girl who used to chat online with other Muslim girls who had similarly left their families in the West, to align themselves with the Syrian ISIS by becoming brides to its fighters. All names have been changed by the writer. The article is titled, "The Secret World of ISIS Brides, You Don't Have to Pay for Anything If You Are a Wife of an ISIS Martyr." The Guardian, Nabila Jafer, June 26, 2015. "It's sinful for you to be staying in UK whilst there is an Islamic caliphate," said Umar in Twitter, while already in Syria and the widow of an ISIS fighter. "Creep out," she told me. "If you can take out a student loan, please do so. What about our religious duty to repay loans?" "No," she said, without missing a beat. "The kafir, the infidel's wealth is halal for us. Islam permits Muslims to steal the infidel's wealth." When I asked her about hurting her parents, she reassured me that it was halal, permissible. "I did it and I'm sure everyone else did it," she wrote. "Right now we are in a state of war." When I mentioned I had non-Muslim friends, Kulthum was stern. "Habibti, my beloved," she wrote, "do not take kafir infidel as your friend." Umar was pitying. "You have to understand that these kafir infidels are our enemies," she wrote to me. "And they will never stop fighting us until we follow their way." Another Western woman in Syria I spoke to, Zara, was almost envious when she discussed Umar's status. "You don't have to pay for anything if you are wife of a shaheed, martyr," she told me. But she was careful not to seem discontented. "All women," she promised me, "were looked after. You will still get money each month." Kulthum wrote once, "Your aspiration should be greater than that." She shared one important trait with the bulk of online ISIS supporters: a belief that a global war between true Islam and the Kafir, infidels was taking place, and that Muslims had to choose a side. Muslim immigrants never speak the truth about their countries. Most of them will tell you that they fled from their countries because their lives were in danger due to their indifferences with the present regimes. This begs the question as to why they did not stay and change the things. They would tell you that it was not possible because the regime was an absolute dictatorship. If you cannot stomach the idea of a dictatorship, then why do you yearn for the implementation of Sharia and Caliphate government, since they are even more dictatorial? ISIS is the true expression of the Islamic Caliphate rule. After her narrow escape, Susan Johnson came into details of her story that were previously unavailable to her, which had been omitted in her books and movies. Her mother began to narrate incidences and circumstances around her when she was merely 7. The mother started from the time she met the old Saudi in downtown Bombay. Then, she explained to her why the wicked old man agreed to give her a visa and a free ticket, and sponsored her as a maidservant to work in one of his houses in Saudi Arabia. Rayhana narrated in detail what had happened to her while she prepared for the fateful trip. Many times, while she cried, she begged her daughter to forgive her for taking her from Bombay to Jeddah. With the benefit of hindsight, she would never have left India. Despite the still painful memories, Rayhana hid nothing from her daughter. She told of her love story with Jamal Khan and explained that he was the man that she met after many years in the USA, and the one she fell in love with and married. Neither the mother nor the daughter had blamed each other for being in love with the same man at that time because each one's affair was unknown to the other. After hearing her mother out, Susan decided to rewrite her life story once again and republish it as a book. She planned to include the missing portions of her mother's tragic story. After consulting her husband, Susan decided to credit the new book to her mother. Michael Lewinsky, deciding that prudence was the better part of valor, also changed his name to Mark Johnson. Thus the new book was to be published under the name of Rayhana Khan. By then, the former book had completed a 7-year run and the publisher's rights to it had ceased. According to the contract, after 7 years, Christina Lewinsky had the right to republish her book with a publisher of her choice. This time, Susan chose to republish her story under the name of her mother and with a different publisher. The new book was going to be published in language other than English. She decided to write it in Urdu and translate it into Hindi, Arabic, Persian, Afghani, and Indonesian simultaneously. She wanted to make Muslims her main target audience. She realized that her maiden book was mainly read by non-Muslims. This time, Muslims will be able to read it in their own vernacular languages. Carried away by the potential to reach even more people, Mark Johnson suggested that she produce yet another movie based on the new book. Susan liked the idea but came up with different twist. This time around, she wanted her story to be directed by someone from Bollywood. She wanted her life story to be enacted in an Indian movie. She wished for Indian and Pakistani Muslims to change the way they treat their wives and daughters after watching the movie. She wanted them to know how a female child suffers at the hands of an adult husband. Muslims can tolerate any critique directed toward their religion except against their Prophet Muhammad. Recently, a Pakistan-born, Bollywood actress, Veena Malik handed down 26-year sentence by a Pakistani court for blasphemous wedding scene based on the marriage of Prophet Muhammad's daughter. Although Susan Johnson did not know it at the time, Indian movies are adored by Arabs, Asians, and Africans. As soon as a Bollywood movie is released, it would have been screened in Arab and African cities. In fact, a Bollywood movie has a far wider audience than any good Hollywood movie. For instance, the Oscar award-winning Hollywood movie, Titanic, 1997, did not cover the expense of screening it for one day in the best movie theater in Khartoum City. Titanic is number 1 among the top 10 best Oscar-winning movies of all time. Muslims in Indonesia, Iran, Turkey, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh also love watching Indian movies. Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, and other South Asians love to watch Bollywood movies, with subtitles, of course. It stood to reason then that if Susan's new project takes off, she might create a huge revolution in a global scale, and such universal revolution might result in a second paradigm shift. The first paradigm shift occurred in the West and changed it from a religious society into a secular society. This time, Susan decided to hire a ghostwriter and set out ads in one of the most widely read newspapers in New York. She mentioned that she wanted an Urdu-speaking author to assist her in writing her autobiography. She offered to pay handsomely, and more than 50 candidates responded. Susan asked each candidate to disclose his or her religious affiliation and his or her academic and career qualifications. Some of the candidates accused her of being a racist. They told her that it was unlawful in the USA to ask a candidate about his or her gender, religion, and race while advertising for prospective candidates or in a job interview. Resolute, Susan told each candidate that that person had to have been born and brought up as a Christian. The accusations did little to Susan, and she upheld her conditions. She stressed her prerequisite for highly educated Urdu-speaking writers, who were Christians. None of the interested candidates met her conditions. Faced with no other choice, she was compelled to compromise. The person who was selected for the job was a Pakistani female student who was doing her master's degree in a prestigious Christian institute of learning, called Dallas Theological Seminary, Texas. She was born and brought up as a Muslim but converted to Christianity 10 years ago. Susan asked her to come and live in her house during her vacation and write her memoirs. She also promised to double her wages. She closed the deal by offering to pay her an hourly wage even when she was not working on the autobiography. The Pakistani girl was struggling to finance her education, and looked upon the offer as a God-given opportunity. It took the Pakistani student a little over 2 months to write the story of Rehana Khan and her daughter. During this period, a wonderful friendship between the Pakistani girl and Susan developed. Susan came to know that the Pakistani girl herself went through a hellish life as a little girl in a remote village in Pakistan. When she was 10, she was given in marriage to a man who was as old as her father. She suffered under that cruel husband for a couple of years before he was killed by the NATO troops. After the death of her husband, she returned to her father's house. Then, she was allowed by her parents to go back to school. Her family and other relatives considered her to be accursed because she supposedly killed her husband. Her parents knew full well that no one would be interested in marrying a girl who was already deflowered. For that reason, they expected her to acquire some degree of education and then find a job to support herself. When she finished the 12th grade, her parents did not object to her venturing to the big city for work. In fact, the parents allowed her to go away in order to get rid of her for good. Through the help of one of her teachers, she found a work in Karachi. Her teacher was a Christian nun who taught English in a Catholic convent school. During her study in St. Patrick's High School, the girl was invariably exposed to the teachings of Christianity. She learned a great deal of the Bible's stories and the basic tenets of Christian dogma. Nonetheless, she remained adherent to her Islamic faith. In Karachi, she was employed as a translator for an NGO. While there, she fell in love with an American. She refused to sleep with her American boyfriend until he agreed to embrace Islam and marry her. Shortly after they got married, he took her with him to the States. In less than a year, he left her, having fallen in love with a white girl. When she came to know that he was living with his new girlfriend in her apartment, she divorced him. She had a difficult time after her husband deserted her. She worked hard to support herself. During her school days, she was attracted to the teachings of Jesus. When she was left all alone in the States, she began to read the Bible and joined an Indian Christian group. Through her fellowship with those Indian Christians, the Lord opened her heart and she converted officially from Islam to Christianity. Then, she joined the Dallas Theological Seminary and began her study of theology. Her intelligence and interest in the subject matter was evident to her professors by the rate she absorbed lessons in theology and church history. The ghostwriter whom Susan Johnson had chosen was called Balkis Abdul Kalam. When Balkis completed the text in Urdu, Susan requested that it be translated into English. Susan knew that if the new version of her story was translated into English, it would be easy to find scholars to convert it into other languages. Accordingly, Balkis spent another 2 months with Susan Johnson's family handling her request. Susan paid her for every minute she spent in the house. Shortly after her mother's story was written in Urdu and thereafter translated into English, Susan Johnson travelled with her husband to Mumbai. They left their daughters with their grandmother, Rehana Khan. Susan once again donned burqa to hide her features. Making a Bollywood movie turned out to be more difficult than a Hollywood affair. Every director she approached told her that the story involved high risks, and for that reason, she was tactfully requested to finance her own movie. The directors fully anticipated that controversial movie of this genre would never get by the Indian government censors. After many consultations with different directors, Susan and her husband agreed to finance the production of the movie. The director who was chosen for making the movie was a staunch Hindu who despised Islam and Muslims with passion. When that issue was settled, the director asked Susan to translate the manuscript in Hindi. He believed that it would be a waste of money and time to make the movie in Urdu. Susan hired a linguist from Bollywood to translate her manuscript into Hindi. The expert took 3 months to do the job. During this period, Susan and Mark did not leave a tourist site in India untouched. Little did Susan know that there were such beautiful places in India until she visited them with her husband. The most wonderful places they saw was the Taj Mahal in Agra city and the beautiful Golden Sands beaches in Goa city. The Hindu director came up with a brilliant idea that would facilitate the production of the movie and reduce the cost of its production. He suggested that the story of the child bride and the old man of Arabia should be cut in 2 halves. He believed that the movie should be created out of the first half of the book. He argued that in order to avoid reproducing a movie that had already been created by a Hollywood director, many happenings in the life of Ifat Khan should be chopped off. According to him, the movie should focus on the love story of Rehana Khan and the old Saudi man and the abuse of her daughter by the same Arab man. In other words, the movie should begin with Rehana Khan meeting Sheikh Faiz bin Ahmed in front of the Taj Mahal Hotel at Kolaba and end with his murder at the Mumbai Arthur Road jail. Instead of being murdered by a Christian, the old man should be murdered by one of his jailers and the guard should be a Hindu. Although, the Hindu director did not give a compelling reason for changing the murderer from a Christian to a Hindu, Susan and Mark were agreeable to the new idea. By the way, in order to hide their true identities, Susan and Mark used aliases and no one knew their real names or their address in the States. As the Hindu Bollywood director anticipated, the making of the movie took only 6 months and the cost of its production was reduced to a minimum, what with the entire movie being shot in India. Indian directors are known for their unmatchable creativity. If you ask a Bollywood director to act a movie on the top of the Black House of Allah, the Kaaba, at Mecca, or in the White House at Washington, D.C., or even inside the Pentagon at Arlington County, Virginia, he would make it for you without visiting Saudi Arabia or America. Accordingly, with Indians were dressed up like Saudis, everything that had happened to Rehana and Ifat in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was acted in the deserts of Rajasthan, India. Many foreign students from Africa were hired, costumed as Eritreans alongside students from Iran and other Arab countries were involved in shooting the Middle Eastern and Iranian scenes. The movie excluded the kidnap of Ifat Khan by the Bollywood director, Mahmood Khan, and the abuses that followed. It however included the rape of the 11-year-old Hyderabadi girl for which the evil Saudi old man was arrested at Mumbai International Airport and thrown behind bars where he breathed his last. It was 2.5-hour movie and generally thought to be many times better than its Hollywood counterpart. Many foreign copies of the movie were created before its official release date. Those foreign copies had subtitles in Arabic, Persian, Urdu, Indonesian, Afghani, Turkish, and some African languages. Many copies had subtitles in European languages such as English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Greek, Polish, Danish, Dutch, Bosnian, and Swedish. The main target were the Muslims living in those European countries and know only the native languages. The foreign copies were sent to their destinations before the movie was released in India. It was scheduled that all the movies to be shown in theatres on the same day they were released in the thousands of movie theatres all over India. Millions of DVDs were created and scheduled to be distributed in stores all over Hindustan. Susan and Mark were advised by the director to return to their country a month before the movie was released. The Hindu director and his family left India at the same time and travelled to Miami. In the course of their year-long stay in India, Susan and Mark made contacts with professional translators and renowned publishing companies in Beirut, Cairo, Baghdad, Damascus, Amman, Sana'a, Tripoli, Tunisia, Algeria, Rabat, Khartoum, Asmara, Lagos, Tehran, Istanbul, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Kabul, Karachi, Dhaka, and Tel Aviv. In order to obscure the identity of the author, the movie was given a different name from the book. The Hindu director chose to name it Layla and Majnun. It was supposedly a new version of the famous and popular classic Arab love story of Layla and her lover Qais. Layla and Majnun, also known as the Madman and Layla, in Arabic Majnun Layla or Qais and Layla, in Persian is a classical Arab story, popularized by Azerbaijani poet Nizami Ganjavi's masterpiece, Layla-o Majnun. It is based on the real story of a young Arab man called Qais and later on became known as Majnun Layla. In today's Iraq during the Umayyad Caliphate era in the 7th century when Arabs defeated Persia, Ctesiphon was destroyed, and Persians built Iraq. In one version, he spent his youth together with Layla, tending their flocks. In another version, upon seeing Layla he fell passionately in love with her. In both versions, he went mad when her father prevented him from marrying her. For that reason, he came to be called Majnun, Arabic, meaning madman. In actual fact, in the Middle East, North Africa, Iran, and India the story of Majnun Layla is more popular than many classical Arabian, Indian, and Persian stories which became popular in the West such as the 1001 Nights, also called the Arabian Nights, Arabic Alf Layla wa Layla, collection of largely Middle Eastern and Indian stories of uncertain date and authorship whose tales of Aladdin, Ali Baba, and Sinbad the Sailor have almost become part of Western folklore, Asian literature, Encyclopaedia Britannica. Given its obvious historical reference and popularity, the new Bollywood movie attracted millions of Muslims in India, Pakistan, Iran, Indonesia, the Middle East, Africa, and all over the other Muslim countries. Nevertheless, Layla in this new movie was the victim Rehana Khan, who was accused of being a professional Indian prostitute and condemned to be stoned to death, and Qais was the evil Arab man who kidnapped and imprisoned her daughter for 10 years. It was a very different story from the classic. The Hindu director, in the opening credits itself, artfully stated that the movie was based on a true story between an Indian Muslim woman and a 70-year-old Saudi. For 1 week, millions of audiences in India and the rest of the Third World saw the movie. No one doubted or recognized the real motive behind the strange movie. It was well-disguised show. At first, the critics of Bollywood mistook it for an attack on the Indian and Arab cultures. Those critics based their arguments on the usual phenomena of sexual harassment and abuse that tend to descend onto Indian employees under Arab employ. They also directed scathing critiques on Arab tourists who purchase poor Indian women and take them to the Sahara Desert of Arabia for their sexual pleasure. The first person to raise objection against the movie and expose its real motive was an Indian Muslim student girl studying at the University of Mumbai. Her name was Imrana Sheikh and she was doing her Master in Philosophy and Comparative Studies of Religions. Imrana had recently read the book of The Child Bride and the Old Man of Arabia, and also saw the Hollywood version of the movie. She approached a local newspaper and expressed her doubts about the movie Layla and Majnun. She told the director of that newspaper that the director of the new movie had stolen the story of a Hollywood movie and made his film out of it. What it began as a doubt of a student turned into a hotly debated topic among the Bollywood circles. The first question: who was the Indian woman whose life story the movie was created? The movie claimed that it was based on a true life story of an Indian woman. Secondly, who was Mrs. R. Khan who wrote the story and passed it to the director? The director was not available in Mumbai to answer those questions. Nevertheless, some of the critics concluded that the woman in the story was the Mumbai slum girl whose daughter appeared in the Old English movie. The critics believed the claim of the student Imran Sheikh and concluded that the movie was a fraud, plagiarized from an old Hollywood movie. Such fraud and plagiarism is common occurrence in Bollywood. Their conclusion stirred up the religious sentiments of Muslims and led to uproar all over India. The news reached beyond the borders and led to many Pakistani movie theatres being torched by angry mobs. Many owners of the theatres and workers were attacked in their homes and brutally killed with their houses razed to the ground. It did not take long before the Indian media uncovered the entire truth behind the movie. Some of the Indians who acted in the movie mentioned that the story was based on a true story written by NRI, Indian woman, and financed by her American husband. The old Hollywood movie was based on a story written by an Indo-American woman called Christina Lewinsky. She was the same Mumbai slum girl on whose life story that movie was created. From this, the Indian media concluded that the NRI was none other than Ifat Khan and the foreign financier of the movie was her American husband, Michael Lewinsky. Christina was the same author of the old story and Mrs. R. Khan was her mother, Rehana Khan. While the investigations of the actual people behind the movie were in progress, Muslims turned the world upside down. Many movie theaters and music stores were attacked and destroyed by outrageous violent mobs. Some of the rioters went to the American embassies and Indian embassies in their respective countries and threw stones and bricks into the compounds. Many employees, workers, and guards were seriously injured. The rioters demanded the hanging of the author of the controversial book and the maker of the offensive movie. The Islamic clerics delivered fiery speeches in mosques, schools, on TVs, and radios. They considered the screening of the movie part of a Western ploy to destroy Islam. They blamed America and considered the Zionist state of Israel behind such a conspiracy against Islam. As Muslims have long claimed, they said, if a Muslim man quarrels with his wife in his house, he would say Israel behind the fight. The anger of Muslims reached critical mass when the books began selling on the open market. The English manuscript was translated in Arabic and published by a famous Lebanese publishing company in Beirut. Likewise, a translating company published the book of Layla and Majnun in Persian, the title of the second book of Susan Johnson having been changed to correspond with the movie. Wherefore, all the translated versions carried the new name of Layla and Majnun. In Jakarta, the Indonesian translation of the book was published at the same time the movie came out in the movie theaters and sold as DVDs in stores. In Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, Urdu and Afghani versions of the book filled the markets. Likewise, the book was released in Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iran, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Sudan, Nigeria, Eritrea, Malaysia, Israel, and some Middle East countries. India was the last country to witness the publication of the book. The book sold in large quantities when its copies came out in Hindi and Urdu. Some bookstores in New Delhi and Mumbai carried the English translation of the manuscript. Almost every Hindu in India bought a copy of the provocative book. Even Indian Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, and Christians purchased the book. Everyone bought a copy of the book had already seen the movie in the silver screen. In a month's time, the movie and the book had done considerable damage to the public image of Islam and its prophet. Many people, after watching the movie and reading the book, considered the Prophet Muhammad a pedophile undeserving of adulation and thus, not the ideal for moral perfection. Before the production of the movie, no one in India knew that the Prophet of Islam had married a 6-year-old girl and tied her up for 3 years and finally raped her when she was 9. Hindus and the followers of other religions mocked Islam and its followers openly in the media, workplaces, schools, and universities. Many Muslims, especially the youth, had serious doubts on the authenticity of Islam and their prophet. Some Muslims spoke openly in the media and said that their faith in Islam was shaken after watching the movie and reading the book of the Indian slum girl. The provocative movie and the global riots that it caused across the Muslim world stirred up the inquisitiveness of many Europeans and other Westerners and led them to watch it with subtitles in their native languages. All in all, the outcome of the new controversial book and the provocative Bollywood movie had brought totally different results from what Christina and Michael had expected.